Hello, everyone. Thank you once again for tuning into the Inward Narrow podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, and today I'm with Manuel. How you doing today, Manuel?
Very good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I appreciate you coming back on. If anybody remembers or if they
Of
had watched
course.
back in, goodness, was it like November or December?
Yeah, it's been a couple of months at this point.
Yeah, it's been a
Well over a
while.
year.
But we had Manuel
Yeah.
on, and we talked about a multitude of things. I hope that we didn't talk about anything like too crazy off the rails. But today we're going to talk about a similar topic and kind of revisit a little bit of what we discussed last year, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I love crazy. Throw it out. Just throw it at me any way you want. Doesn't matter with me.
Sure, awesome. Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, mainly what I wanted to talk to you about is, and since you're being so open about it, I feel more, on occasion, I could ask this bold question from you. But, Manuel, you described to us last time that you were on that when you first entered into this country, it was back in, I think you said 2004, and that was without your discretion, without your understanding that that's what you were doing.
So yes, no, but it was actually earlier. It was in 2000, right at the turn of the right at the turn of the century. And I remember, and it was 1999, and the conversation was already starting to brew, really, really well, of how we were gonna, come and start living here, on the other side, as it's usually called.
Gotcha. Very,
Yeah.
wow. So, okay, with that in mind, we haven't really touched too much on the political climate, more so as a nation on this channel often. But something I do want to bring up, like I said, kind of before when we were speaking, is relevant to Binghamton. We have had ICE deportations, which I don't know if that's like a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how things look, how or who that person was. But
Yeah.
I want to ask you. There have been reports of people that were green card, either married to U.S. citizens or had green cards that were then deported and outside of the country. Do you have
Yeah.
news of things like that happening to you or people that you know?
It is a very complex issue. This it's never yes or no. Things like this. Personally, I don't have any fear for myself, and nobody in my immediate family that I know of has. I'm worried for them, but
Okay.
if there is a person out there who is the green card holder and they do unfortunately have been arrested, or committed any serious offense, then of course it's worrying them for me. But in the immediate family, honestly, we're just living every single day, clocking to our 9 to 5, and we really just don't think about it.
That's
You know.
that's kind of a scary thought to have. That at any point, if you get pulled over, if you have an infraction, something happens, and a police officer needs to be there, that you could end up losing your spot in this country, and I feel like that's severely unjust.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's a very complex topic because sure, ICE might detain the person, but there is a whole legal process that they have to follow. Meaning, the person in question um, has to be uh, has to be presented in front of a judge. They are,
Right, they have due
entitled to
process.
their. Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. So it's not to worry. So it's the issue is not necessarily ICE what they're doing, but the fear mongering amongst other Latinos to those who are less documented, either for
Wow,
views
wow, really?
or for rage bait, whatever it might be. So it starts to spread a lot of misinformation um, instead of helping, the people from similar countries and similar backgrounds. That's the really big issue.
Right, and
And
I
so
guess,
there's
yeah. Go on, go on.
No, and there's a very small majority who are actually doing the correct thing and saying, don't be afraid. This unfortunately has happened all the time. It's just, it's more out there. It's just much more obvious nowadays. But ICE has been detaining people for the longest of time. This is not the first time it's happened.
Well, yeah, I guess that's also true as well. But to such a severe regard, I mean, I don't want to kind of contribute to that fear mongering if that's, or, I know this isn't misinformation, unfortunately, is,
Mhm.
there's deportation, meaning somebody who came into this country illegally is then brought back to the country they came from. A Chilean goes back to Chile. Sure,
Mhm.
that's understandable. Detention in Guantanamo Bay or an El Salvadoran prison, I can't imagine that that's the proper thing to do with our common man. regardless or not if they broke a certain law to enter this country illegally. Guantanamo Bay is and has been used for torture. I can't imagine the conditions are adequate for humans, of any regard. With that in mind, do you think that that's not happening? Or do you think that's maybe misinformation, or do you think that's true? That yes, that is something that's happening, and what's the consequence of that for you?
Well, well, from what I understand, not every single the common man doesn't go to Guantanamo Bay without good reason, you know. And what I'm finding, at least, is with this whole ICE raid that's going on, is that some people really are downplaying, the severity of their actions. They want to pretend they didn't do what they needed to do. And so now when things are being, when reality hits them, like this is the real consequences, and just I think people just jump to conclusion, but they don't really, tend to kind of step back and use reason as to, is this, even justifiable? Now, to torture anyone, at any prison, be in Guantanamo, be it, the high security prison, where is it, in Mexico or Nevada? I forget exactly. It's never right, but keep in mind, that torturing in prison has been done much worse all around the world. So, I mean, no person ever should be tortured for their actions, but there should be some sort of consequence, I guess.
Right.
And
there is this idea within the American justice system that the punishment fits the crime. There's a Latin phrase for that escapes me at this time, but punishment fitting the crime.
Yeah.
Maybe I should put it in more blunt terms. I don't believe that any person should be tortured for any amount of time, regardless what they've done. We could go back to say during Nazi Germany at the end of World War II and the Nuremberg trials.
Yeah.
The commanding officers in the Nazi army, they were not tortured to death. They were they were either hanged or they were shot. And I think that is we understand, the atrocities that those people did. We could have easily justified treating them terribly, much more terribly than they had of their common man. But for a small infraction of crossing a border, which, mind you, and this is maybe a very, if you really want to break it down, this is the truth. All borders are kind of a fictitious line that man has created to separate man. And yes, there's very distinctful reasons that there's lines in the sand that, demonstrate what a country can and can't do. And I agree that countries should have borders and that there should be laws in which protect the country's national security, who can enter and who can't. However, punishing somebody historically should line up with what the crime was, what they did, and what they did at the time. And, invading countries, laying waste to populations of people, genociding an entire religious sect in your country is not even close to coming somewhere and overstaying your visa, which are the majority of the people that are here illegally.
No, exactly, and I know I mentioned this last time. That in many ways, just to piggyback off of what you just said, in many ways, that's why the U.S. has been very forgiving. Because I know so many other countries, they're much more stricter, and they, these people are sent to jail and kept there as what I think are hostages, instead of deporting them back to their own country. So I think, if anybody does come illegally, and this is something, that was engraved in my brain, and the understanding that I was made to understand was that, if that I'm coming to this country for better opportunities, and I have to behave because, because the process of getting someone over the border, in this case illegally, is extremely expensive nowadays, extremely dangerous, extremely deceitful for the person trying to cross.
Right.
It's people, I mean, if you were to go out the border of California, over there in San Isidro or Tijuana, there are people who are camping right outside the border because either they were told that they were going to be cross, say, for example, next week,
Sure.
but by that point they have lost everything. They have no more money to pay a coyote, which is the person who initiates the crossing, and they've lost all hope. In extreme cases, I've been hearing cases of women being told to take birth control because, as form of payment, they have to,
Oh yeah. Okay.
unfortunately, yeah, they have to sell themselves, or some of the men who have tried to escape, they lose a limb, for as form of payment for. So
Wow.
it's a very, very complex. It gets very, very, very dark very, very quickly. So that's why it's the understanding that if you come to this country illegally, you are to behave, you are to work, you're to behave, and if you're not going to stay, at least try to contribute in a positive manner. You know.
So
And-
yeah, there's a lot of statistics that line up for what good things immigrants do, whether they're undocumented or documented. They
yeah,
pay into the
exactly.
tax system, they contribute to the workforce, and they are taking jobs that most Americans do not want. So they're lower
Yeah,
paying jobs, less skilled jobs, but they're more labor intensive. So
exactly. And
yeah,
and into that, but there are the ones, unfortunately, who come to this country and they make a mockery of this country. They criticize, and it's just that. In fact, in high school, we did an experiment just within the class about asking. The professor was asking how should we treat someone who comes into our home, and how we expect that person to behave. And said and done, the entire class said if this person is a guest in our house and they're not behaving, they're to be kicked out. And but we were not, we didn't know that we were part of a class exercise experiment
right.
and because the teacher was trying to show us how the US has to think about these things, has to like take into consideration so many things. But in fact, there was on the news, it just came, I just saw it like about 2 days ago. There was a man who, I think it was on TikTok, and I think also on Instagram. He was from Venezuela, and he was constantly just bashing the U.S., constantly bashing the U.S.
Right.
And there was also rumors, that he was doing some illegal stuff. And said and done, he was deported back to Venezuela. So it's kind of like, well, you got an opportunity to come. You kind of screwed it up, buddy. So,
But
you
that's
know
the
what?
thing, though. That maybe that's kind of what underscores a lot of what I'm personally having a problem with. But I think what is the underlying issue is
Yeah,
that is not illegal. Criticizing the United States government while being inside the United States is not illegal. If you are,
it is. It is not. However, this person is not American,
but
and
that
so it's perceived as a threat.
it
From a,
doesn't matter though, because if you not even if you are in the United States, the supremacy clause of the Constitution states it's supreme law of the land. If you are inside if you're inside the United States, regardless of where you are, unless it's like one of the territories or what are they called? I forget the exact language used for
yeah, yeah,
islands. Unassociated or what is it? This is something, whatever. But the Constitution applies to you, meaning you have a First Amendment, Second Amendment, everything. You have a freedom of speech, right to assemble, freedom of religion, freedom of expression. These are all things afforded to you by the United States government as soon as you are in this country, whether it's legally or illegally. Meaning you have due process, and meaning you have the right to criticize the government, even if you're not a citizen. So that means that if people are actually coming to this country and they're not documented correctly, they're not American citizens, and then they criticize the American government, rounding them up and deporting them is unconstitutional. And that's the problem, is that's what's happening, and we know it's unconstitutional, and we can prove it's unconstitutional. There are things in the past, like the 1784, 1780, maybe it's 1784, maybe before that, or after that, the Alien and Sedition Act. Basically, it was if there were people that were loyal to other countries or they were, more likely to fight for another country, we were deporting them because we said that they were, basically illegal agents of that country working to undermine the entire, integrity of the country. Is that so much the case now? There are over 330 million Americans in this country, and some of those people maybe are not documented citizens. Do you really believe? Maybe this is my overarching question, that somebody criticizing the government is that big of an issue of national security that they should not be afforded the First Amendment right simply because they're not an American citizen?
No, it's a tough question, and it's a tough question because it goes into the world of what's called philosophy, and unfortunately, it can be an issue because the way so people come and go. Certain people come and go, but unfortunately, their ideas do stay.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's passed down to another person, and that person expands on it. So kind of so I understand, and this is just kind of also overreaching the subject, why the United Kingdom back in the 18th century was concerned about the colonies separating, just because this person had this idea in the colonies, but even if they were to get rid of this person through execution or imprisonment or whatever, that idea would still be floating around, and it's hard to control once an idea once it gets out of when it gets out of loose. Sorry, when it gets loose out there.
I understand.
So in the terms of kind of going back to your point in using the Nazis as an example, yes, Germany has done, well, in Europe in general, did everything they possibly could to control the idea of Nazism, but it's still alive. We see it in the U.S. It's still in Europe, even though it might be still, even though it's highly illegal in Europe. You have neo-Nazis in the U.S. You have neo-Nazis in certain parts of Europe as well. So it's
Right.
so it's that's why ideas are very, very, very difficult to control.
But that's
Very, very.
kind of and here's the thing. If you view from the top down as the American government and you see things that could possibly undermine your power structure, of course you're going to say that's an issue of national security. However, that doesn't mean that it's not something guaranteed under the Constitution that somebody can proliferate. If they're interested in sharing ideas, regardless if it's detrimental to the U.S., if yeah, to the U.S. national health or national security, they still have a right to do so. If it's to the extent of directly harming people, gathering in the form of like, okay, somebody infiltrates this country, they're illegal. And I don't usually like using that term, but say for this hypothetical, they're an illegal alien. They got into this country, they're from whatever country you want, and they're here to create the downfall of the United States. Yes, I don't think that that person should be in this country. They go online, they spread information, they try to recruit people. Yes, that's something that's a little bit of an issue. The second that they say that yes, we are, we've gotten everybody together, we're going to go strike tonight, or marching down wherever, we're gonna, blow up a church, a hospital, a clinic, whatever, then something can be done about it. And we have a lot of things in place, especially under the Patriot Act after 9/11, that allows the U.S. government to see these things. And that's where the intervention should take place. Not when somebody, like I said, I don't think it's a good idea for somebody, if they want to undermine the United States, to come into the United States, because I live here and I like this country. But
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that they don't have a constitutional right simply because they think differently. Because what if sometime in the future somebody does infiltrate the United States, except the United States has gotten to a point where it's so fascistic or so authoritarian where it's a remnant of what it used to be. And so now we're in a place where somebody comes in, they could be bringing ideas of prosperity, but it's detrimental to the United States at that time. So should we not hear these new ideas because it's detrimental to the national security of the current administration or the current outlook of the United States government? Or should we instead embrace what's good for the country, or what has the potential to be good, and curb everything that has the potential of being bad when it rears its head of being bad?
That is a tough question too, because unfortunately, if we were to adopt one way of thinking, it most likely is going to alienate a certain group who might think otherwise. So in that creates it's a very slippery slope, because let's say we do adopt ideal A versus ideal B, then ideal A starts to create in many ways a plutocracy that does undermine the lives of everyone. And so that's what the basis of this country was about, to accept everybody's ideas in equal terms as best as possible, without having a certain group a certain individual dictating how everybody's
Yeah.
life has been. So I'm glad that this country has decided to have the three branches of government that we do, because by all means, I mean, just historically around, monarchies have always been an issue. Even if they are around now, they're always a parliament that has to make some sort of decision, has some sort of influence.
For the most part, yeah.
For the most part, yeah, with their prime ministers, even though there is the head of state. So in many ways, I do encourage people to voice their ideas, but if it starts hurting someone, like to your point, or if it starts interrupting daily activities, like just not too long ago, 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, I went up to UC Berkeley, which is, for those who don't know, is a very prestigious California public university that competes, with the Ivy Leagues. They're that prestigious and really good. But the point is that they shut down the campus, and there was protests everywhere. And when I went, there was graffiti on the walls or
Oh,
certain areas. There was tents everywhere. There was a whole. It was just there was mess everywhere. It was just, and it was during graduation season as well. And I'm like,
yeah.
this is not the way things should be done. Like, I understand you guys are angry, and I have, it's but to stop by stopping traffic, or
Yeah.
interrupting a ceremony that's so important for so many people, that is just, it's very disrespectful. And so, from what I'm seeing, at least from my point of view in California, is that I think people have just gone overboard at this point. And even though they are exercising, the privilege that they have, um, they're abusing it, because let's say, they would start acting the same way in a more totalitarian or more conservative country, for lack of a better term. Those people would already be hung. They would have been already shot. They
That
would have been already in
yes.
prison.
And
So people, like, I think in this country, they're not aware of how extremely privileged they
no,
are.
that's 100% true. That is, yeah,
So
that's a very true statement. I could agree with that as well.
yeah,
That's more of an older argument. I've definitely heard that before. People have, and I could agree. Yes, if you were, what's a good example? Let's say if you were part of like the, I forget what exactly what it was called, Civil War in China, and
yeah,
you got exiled to Taiwan, and basically for the rest of modern history up or that time and up till modern history, you were afraid of what was going to happen to you.
yeah,
That like people escaped communist China during that time and started a new life in other countries because of how bad things had gotten, and that's kind of never been solved. So for a lot of people, I could say it's a kind of situation where if you're not from somewhere like that and understanding of that time, you will take that for advantage, or not for advantage, but for granted, and you won't kind of understand the consequence of what other countries have done to journalists, or in whatever regard. But
yeah.
there's also times in American history where we've done things that maybe not a
Oh,
lot of people understand. Like
yeah,
there
no,
was,
no. Yeah, the U.S. by no means is a perfect country. There's still flaws, but I believe it's not because I'm American at this point. But I think I do believe the U.S. has made the very conscious effort to be as perfect as it possibly can be. There are still things to fix up, and there's areas to improve. But like, to your point, like these, countries that are still, being so controlling, is
it's
it's
definitely
considered.
on its way out, though. It's definitely on its way out. It's I mean, I think every year, I think I'm saying I think I can't confirm this right off the top of my head, and I can't do it immediately now. So we're just gonna go with I'm pretty sure. And if everybody wants to check this out, I think it's called like the World Democracy Index or something like that. It tracks how democratic the world has gotten, and every year it gets more democratic. Monarchies lose less power, they abdicate, or they allow for constitutions to be written that kind of subvert some of their power. Other places in the world expand human rights access. Yeah, I mean, just as well, there's certain places in the world, there's parts of Africa where you can't be gay. You can't, there's no
Yeah.
gay marriage. There's no access to health care. There's no access to women's rights. Like things like
Mhm.
that, we could say we take that for granted all the live long day. And we do in America. But we've also gone through periods in history where that wasn't the case. So,
No,
and that kind of goes back to the same, like America is, it's a good place to be, and there's a reason people come here. Is because we are open and we are accepting to the extent of what I think we used to be more of, but not so much more, anymore. In the current, I don't really want to talk like like strict politics, but say with the Trump administration, his policies certainly have been to alienate, U.S. allies and other countries. And maybe I could put it this way: America first does not mean America only. And I think globalism is especially in global economy, it's a very good thing. It keeps prices down and allows us to outsource materials, and imports and exports are a main part of trade. And when you have a country that doesn't, we don't strictly rely on imports, which is a great thing, but when we can export the amount that we do and we can control the global economy, that's why the United States is so great, and that's why people want to come here. It's because of how well we treat other countries, and how good we have historically. And kind of like you said, we try to be like this picture perfect thing. Yes, we've had a lot of failures. Yes, we've tried our best regardless. But I think the bottom line is that we shouldn't be alienating ourselves because we think it's going to make us better. This country was founded on the integrity of people having a place to be where they couldn't before express themselves the way they wanted to. The Pilgrims came here because of religious persecution. And, throughout the entirety of the United States history, if you look, I can't say off the top of my head, but the Statue of Liberty, it says like, give me your weak, give me your poor, give me your sick. And that's the first thing that people see in Ellis Island as they came into this country. But we have fallen far from that, and I believe it's truly because of an administration error.
Yeah, I think it's and I do, unfortunately. I mean, I'll just say this right off the bat: who anyone is listening, I have to. Well, I always try to see whatever administration is currently in office. I try to see their point, and I try to understand, why they put the policies in place. And being the U.S. being the huge country that it is, landmass, and the influence that the U.S. has had in the world for the past forever now at this point, it feels forever at least. In many ways, I kind of just start taking a step back, and I start seeing that some of these countries really do take advantage of the generosity that the U.S. has given.
For sure, yeah, for sure.
So that kind of starts saying, oh, okay, I see. I kind of start to understand what the Trump administration has been saying, that because this country has been so generous with everybody, and I do mean everybody on the entire planet, some people really are, they think that the U.S. is going to be around forever with their support, So
yeah, that's a good point.
And it might be in any way, and the whole thing with Europe is that Europe does depend a lot on the U.S., and I think Europe was abusing it in terms of like not paying their dues or not contributing equally, either politically or economically, or whatever it might be. And so now that the U.S. is starting to say, let's say the U.S. is a person, the U.S. is saying, this is an abusive relationship. It's always one-sided. I don't see you contributing anything. It's always U.S. Like where you guys are contributing anything. It started kind of saying, okay, well maybe the Trump administration does have a point.
Well, I agree that possibly there is there's something relevant about what he's trying to do. Yes, America has certainly given out a lot to other countries and not received what they've done to but there's a reason for that. And that's something maybe he doesn't see or just doesn't care about, which is kind of the American power structure in the world and on the world stage is thus. With NATO, basically, the United States is absolutely untouchable. Besides the United States itself, there's no single country that would be able to combat the United States in any form. China with a bunch of allies, sure, maybe. With the rest of the world, like watching as the United States just struggled, possibly.
It's so funny you say that about. It's so funny you say that about China, because I've spoken to people from China, and they're like, no. As big as China is, even though it seems on the surface they would technically, they know.
I make no contention that China would ever. So I've said this before. It's not manufacturing; it's technology. And yes, manufacturing. If China switched to a war-based economy, they would probably be able to manufacture more than us. However, our technology and our science kind of far exceeds that which they were able to compute with. So it's not a fair comparison. But here's
no, of course.
And then also, if we want to get like deeper into it, the United States will never. We unfortunately, and I say this unfortunately, we could take on the rest of the world because we do possess technologies that are not human technologies. And so
And see,
if we truly wanted to, and if the president during wartime drew out executive orders to take these special access projects and bring them to the forefront, subpoena them all in front of Congress and question them about this and confiscate that technology and use it in war, we would probably be destroyed by the aliens, because they would say, hey, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to use that technology in war, because that would basically be, that's like swords and chivalry to tanks and drones. It's absolutely unfair. So that's if you to back it up all the way, that's the honest truth. But moreover, in our practical environment, to where we say there's economic warfare, there's political pressure, and then there's true regular warfare, conventional warfare. I feel like the United States would do well. But what I'm trying to say is, we do that and we have things set up like that because we know that if it's not us, it'll be somebody else, and somebody else sitting on top. That's better for us, or that's better for somebody else if it's not us. Other countries are waiting, and like you said, the United States is not going to last forever. Maybe it'll evolve into something more productive or larger or better, or maybe it'll dissolve entirely. Who's to say? Who's to find out? We'll just have to stick around and wait and try our best to make sure what we want happens is the good things happen. But regardless, the bottom line is this: the United States, although it's great, although it's powerful, is not the only country on this planet. And to act like the American species is somehow grander than every other person combined is false. It's farcical. It is probably the biggest enemy, to what I can consider to be the progression of humanity, is this idea that Americanism is the only way forward. There are almost 200 sovereign nations on this on this planet. And we cannot say that the United States is so much better simply because we got a lot of things right. Yeah, sure, maybe we're better in some regards, but we are not better as a people. We are all the same people. And that's the struggle that I have to see people getting locked up and thrown into Guantanamo Bay or to an El Salvadoran prison because they think they're a Venezuelan gang member. That kind of breaks my heart, if I'm being honest, because they're not afforded due process simply because they're not natural-born Americans.
Yeah, no, it's a tough thing. To your point about the the U.S. What was it you said about the U.S. Being on the center stage all the time?
So with the power structure in place, basically the United States gives money to Europe, and they have since World War II, after the rebuilding of wartime Europe, because we knew that they would perpetually be in debt to us. We can create this power dynamic to where they're allies, but they always rely on us.
No, sorry, a little bit. No, it was a little bit forward. About the
like economically controlling the world.
Not economically controlling the world, but that the U.S., as powerful as it is, has the decision to rule the world. Quite literally.
Oh, yeah, with like alien technology.
Quite literally.
100%. Like I'm not even like inflating that at all. Like 100%.
No, of course, no. I completely agree. No. The U.S. has the entire planet on a chokehold, but I think that's what really makes the U.S. unique. That if you really do look historically, every single country, even up to today in 2025, has tried to use their small, lesser power in whatever area they are, in whatever area, to control everybody else.
To rule the world, basically.
To rule the world. Every single country in Europe at some point has done it. Every single country in Asia has tried to do it.
That's a great side for my point almost, because what I'm saying with what I've said is the United States basically does rule the world, and it's kind of like almost the complete opposite of your argument. It's almost the antithesis to say that like the United States is such a good country. Yes, it's great. And, there was a time on this planet we were the only country with nukes. We could have said, every country bow down to us, every single one of you, because nobody could stop us. And we could have, but we didn't. Mm-hmm. However, in now today's standards, and this is maybe something I have a bigger problem with Trump about, is because he doesn't remember this or doesn't know, or like I said, maybe just doesn't care, is that the United States gives all this money to other countries and basically subsidizes the world because they are perpetually in debt to either our military protections and trade, because we protect all international trade on the high seas, or it is the scientific guarantees that we can afford to them because people like going to American colleges, or because of our economics and how we can contribute to the global economy. that is control. We do rule the world as Americans. It's just not as overt as people would like it. And so
I think
that's why they want
it's
perpetual warfare in small countries and world places where we can say that's not an American citizen who gives a shit.
in part of the world. It's I think it's very dangerous to call it rule because I think, how should I say this? Like the American influence in many ways has been very positive. Like just if you were to take a look at Korea, like South
I was just gonna say absolutely, yeah.
South Korea would not exist without the US's influence.
Right.
And if you take a look at North Korea, they try to follow a different philosophy, a more Eastern based philosophy rather than Western based philosophy on how to govern, how to live everyday's life. And if the U.S. had have never intervened and so many people had lost their lives during the Korean War, South Korea would have never existed. And said and done, thanks to the U.S., now Korea is one of the most richest, the most thriving countries on the face of the planet. Now, with that being said, Japan also has been a proof for, at least for me,
right,
that American influence has been extremely positive because what Japan was doing, unfortunately, was not the best thing that anybody, wants to hear about. And so,
World War II, they most likely committed more atrocities than the Nazis had.
no, exactly. And so, if it wasn't for the U.S., Japan would not be the economic powerhouse that it came to be, and we wouldn't have this whole anime culture that we
precisely
love in this country. So that's the thing. So I wouldn't say that the U.S. has ruled through force or through fear, but rather through positive influence. Because
through positive influence. That is hilarious.
Yeah.
That's like really, that's a very cool way to say it, though. I like.
No, really, because the world has seen, that everything that the U.S. touches, for the most part, has turned into something great, and
Except
it
for
still
the Middle
happens.
East.
Besides that,
Sub-Saharan continent. Everything that we've ever touched in Africa, everything we've ever touched in the Middle East, everything. But there's a very strong argument to make to say that like we maybe lost our way in the past 30 years.
But even the Middle East has benefited a lot from the U.S. I mean, you take into consideration places like Israel. Yeah, they're thriving. Despite
they cannot exist without the United States. So yeah, that's
even the grand places like Dubai. I know they adopted, the American way of doing business and culture, even though, they'll have their own culture. But I know that Dubai would have not existed if they would have not seen New York or Chicago or San Francisco as like
crazy, actually. Maybe a counterpoint. So I have a friend. He actually lived in the United Emirates. He lived in Dubai, and he was first born in Jordan. And I know his whole family. I was very good friends with him. His name is Jibril. Jib, shout out to Jib if he's watching. He might be watching, but shout out to my boy Jibril. He's a great friend of mine, brother. Anyway, so he told me that it's basically actually fated in the Quran that the desert of Dubai will become a thriving city, and that's what's happened because of the oil money, basically. And I think that's very interesting. That so I could agree that maybe if I didn't know that, I could say they looked at bigger cities in the United States and wanted to achieve what they thought was an American idea of glamour or of
prosperity.
Luxury. Yeah, sure. Prosperity.
Yeah.
That's great. Opportunity, perhaps.
Yeah.
But even better is that, maybe not even better, but even better for their sake is that I feel like it's more so they've done it themselves. Maybe it's helped through selling a lot of oil to the United States. But just as well, I feel like that was something that they would have done, whether the United States was around or not. At some point, not sure. Maybe it would have taken longer without, I'm not familiar with the exact history of how Dubai, whether they sold a lot of oil to the United Emirates, sold the money to the United States, gas to the United States. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
And that's how they became so wealthy, or if it was just like their surrounding countries. But regardless. I think there's a point to be made for American influence on a grand stage or the world stage, and that being like a grand influence of prosperity and opportunity. To go even further with my same friend Jibril, when he came to this country for the first time, And I actually
Mhm.
introduced him to one of my other friends who was Muslim. So they're speaking in Arabic, and I asked him. I said, "Hey, what'd you say?" And he was like, "Oh, I was just telling him, hey, yada yada. I'm so and so." And he goes, we asked about this country, and he said, "Oh, it's not like they say." And he goes, "Everybody says that." And he's like, "Yeah, it's not like they say." And I feel like that's very interesting to know that living here, the United States has a very different appeal to people outside of this country who have never been here, and it's
Yeah.
a lot better than what it actually is. And that's kind of, unfortunately, it's a bit deflating, and it's a bit upsetting. But the United States, it's a good place, but we definitely have problems that people,
Worse.
they just don't know about. So it's definitely inflating the idea of what they consider the United States to be.
And of course, and I told someone very, very long time ago, they said, "Oh, well, the US is full of problems." And I'm telling them, well, yeah, of course, no country is 100% perfect.
Right.
But at least the people who do have a problem can voice their opinion, in a safe manner, as long as, it's not hurting anyone physically or economically or socially. Because, even modern countries like Russia, even though they say oh, it's everybody has privilege of free speech or whatever, people are still getting imprisoned, and so
Yeah. I couldn't agree that in Russia they have free speech.
yeah. So and so in many ways, kind of going back, I do, that's why I admire about the US that like, to your point, the US has the power to take on the world, but yet it doesn't. And it's powerful because through positive influence, not because it forced a country to evolve a certain way it wanted. And
Well, I mean that's not entirely true. We have certainly forced countries to do what we've wanted to through economic pressure or conventional warfare.
well, I mean, no, that's what I was saying earlier. Nothing is perfect, but at least it has been a pretty positive turnaround. To the point of the whole Dubai thing, I think they did exercise the very good. They did exercise the American mentality that how do they say? I forget the exact same phrasing, that you lift up your boots by the straps or something
Oh yeah,
along those lines.
lift yourself up by your bootstraps.
Exactly.
Basically,
Thank you.
it's
Thank
the
you. So
idea that hard work will allow for a prosperous life.
no, exactly, and I think that Dubai, the UAE, in many ways has had to adapt that mentality, and now look what they have. So I think, so to your point about the whole Guantanamo Bay in Venezuela, the thing is, it boils down to, if you're coming to this country, and whoever it is, just be respectful that you are a guest in this country,
Yeah,
until you
I'm totally on board with that,
until
100%.
go through the whole legal process of becoming American. Who was it? And I think I already mentioned this last time as well, that the United States is so unique that you can. I think it was Ronald Reagan who said that you can go to France, but you'll never be French. You
Right.
can
Yeah.
go to England, but you'll never be English. And in the United States, you can be American no matter where you come from.
Right.
Um,
I feel like we've
so
fallen from that, unfortunately, in our modern era. That was back in like the '80s, and that was
yeah.
that's
So
closer to 40 years ago.
exactly. So a very good consensus. I think what the Trump administration is trying to do is just trying to make people more patriotic of the country, because we're so rich in the United States that we don't have problems. Like, we don't have real world problems.
Well,
That
yeah,
we
we're definitely in a bit of a bubble ourselves. When it comes to,
exactly. So it's
especially
kind of like,
considering the world's opinions.
no, exactly. So in many ways, and of course, not to get to not to choose sides. The Trump administration is trying to make, to tell people, to show them, be proud of the country you live in, understand the privileges that you have amongst other people in the world, and just don't be disrespectful about it. So about the
I don't know if I can agree with that exact messaging. I think he's more focused on perpetuating what he likes about this country, which are the parts that have made him a billionaire and made his family a billionaire.
well, of course, every person has their bias. Everybody.
Yeah, I just can't say that somebody at the top of the leadership structure of this country that's a billionaire has consideration for somebody who's beneath them in his eyes. And it's been demonstrated before that he's clearly a very misogynistic and racist person, very self-centered and self-absorbed person. I just don't believe, outside of any policy, that his leadership characteristics or the person that he is a good example of what a leader should be for this country. So it's with that in mind that on the global stage that I think he's really put a bad stain on the American legacy, and I hope kind of things change because, like I've said, deporting people to torture chambers in outside of U.S. jurisdiction, that's something I personally think is absolutely detestable.
It's true, and I kind of, however, I do see it in a slightly different way. Like, let's say, someone does come from Venezuela, and unfortunately, where was it? Was it in Illinois that there was a gang, a known gang from Venezuela? They started living in the suburbs. I think it was Michigan. I think it was Michigan or Illinois, somewhere out there. Started to, in many ways, run the entire apartment complex like they did in Venezuela. And so by all means, those people should not be living in the U.S., kind of to your point that you were saying earlier.
I agree with that 100%, but I don't think that they should be sent to Guantanamo Bay and be tortured or, have, their human rights deprived of them. Yes,
well,
that's just not how we treat criminals.
Well, and the issue is, unfortunately, that these people who, unfortunately, had already murdered people in Michigan or Illinois, again, I forget exactly where it is, they didn't care about, torturing the people that they tortured. So it's very difficult, but and it kind of shows you that the world really is cruel. The world is a really, really cruel place.
Right, but when we perpetuate that cruelty, it's never going to go away. We torture people, and they torture people because we tortured their people, and then we have to torture the people because we perpetuate the torture cycle. So we don't need to contribute to that, and we want to be the example, the shining star of this, this barren rock that is the Earth. Somehow think we're the only people that are important. We have to set the stage, say, hey, this is not what we should do to people. We have created laws for that, and that's involved in due process, which is part of your Fourth and Sixth Amendment right.
And it's true, but unfortunately, people are going to be, how they. So I'm not advocating for torture. No, but nobody should be tortured whatsoever.
Kind of sounds like you're making a good case for it, at least. Not like advocating, but.
No, I'm not advocating for it, but I see why, and not just the U.S. I see why, torture has been around, because people will do, unfortunately, heinous things. So, how it always says an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth.
Yeah, it's eye for an eye and the world go blind.
The world go blind.
Yeah, that's true.
But, it's true. So, to your point of, like, what it is about the ICE raids, I think in many... So this is just the perspective from the world that I live in versus someone in, like, I don't know, in the middle of Vermont or somewhere in New England or, somewhere in Idaho. In many ways, it is a good thing, the ICE raids. Now, are there going to be mistakes where people who have really done nothing are going to, be thrown in? Of course, it's going to happen. But amongst the Latinos, and I'm not speaking for every Latino, but for the majority of the time, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing because it starts to make myself, who is Latino Hispanic, be painted a certain way, in the public's eyes. And it's embarrassing because, how they always say, like, the smallest group always screams the most. And it's just kind of like, like, behave. Like, it's not fair that that we've been here for a very long time, have proven to this country that we are able to be American and uphold the American standard, and then you're coming in to disrupt the whole, hard work that we've built amongst generations. It's absolutely not fair. You do not belong, and you really don't belong in this country. So,
I can see that perspective. It does make sense. It's like, hey, we tried, we did what we had to do. You can't come in and spoil that for everybody, which has led to mass roundups of people and disbanding of human rights.
No. Exactly. So it's kind of, and so it's, again, as a child, I was told, behave or else you're going to get deported.
Right.
Because we have the children like myself, we were taught the absolute immaculate value that we have to come to the U.S.
So let me give you this option then, and this is just a different way of thinking entirely. It's an idea. If you don't think it's a good idea, that's fine. I'm not in a position of power to imply it, or sorry, to apply it.
Sure.
Let's say, for example, instead of these ICE deportations happening, we had people that were immigration officers. And instead, what they did, they went around, they found these people, and as long as they weren't criminals, they approached them and they gave them an opportunity for a fast track to citizenship. They could continue working in the United States, living in the United States, participating in the economy, paying taxes, paying into Social Security, maybe even paying for health insurance, buying into a 401k or a pension plan or retirement. And they can continue to do that. So that way we can say, hey, you've been somebody who's been in this country for 20, 30, 40 years, but we don't just want to ship you out of here because it's a vital piece of our economy, a vital piece of our tax bracket. Yeah, for sure. Of the tax brackets and what the amount of, I think it's like, I can't say for certainty, so I'm not even going to say a number. But it's in the tens of billions, the amount of money that undocumented people pay into the pay into the IRS every year. So with that, it's like, why would we do this to ourselves? It's kneecapping ourselves, especially when these people, like I said before, have jobs that are less desirable for natural-born Americans, and that's okay. Because, yes, maybe they're less paying, but we have a minimum wage in this country. And maybe it's not outstanding, but there's certain states that do have an outstanding minimum wage. Like New York is now over $15. Yes, it's 2025, and maybe we needed that like 10 or 15 years ago. But if you're an undocumented person, you come to the United States and you're in New York and you're working and you're on your way to citizenship, you're going to work your ass off because it's important to set something aside for yourself and also make something new of what your life can become in this country. And we have historically allowed that for people. So why now all of a sudden do we have to rip that away and say that everything this country's been founded on and for the majority of our history is no longer what we'd like to uphold? Why is that the right thing to do?
No, exactly. And so that's why, it kind of touches back on the point that I was saying earlier, that it's happening for a good reason. That's why I want to make abundantly clear to everyone, every single Latino that is ever hearing this or ever will hear this, that you do have to have a good reason for ICE to come to your house or find you on the street and actually detain you. People try to boil down the ICE raids to, oh, you're an immigrant, you're automatically going to get deported. It really doesn't work that way. It's just much more. There's more complexity to the issue.
It seems like if you are somebody, and this has been the example for the journalist who was arrested, who is I think Palestinian. They spoke out against what Donald Trump's plans were to do in Gaza, and he has an American wife, and he's got a green card to be in the United States. He has since not been known where he is. He was rounded up and basically disappeared. His family does not know where he is. I wish I was trying to find it before his exact name. I couldn't find the name. Because apparently this has been happening a couple different times where students that have green cards that are here for academic visa are saying something negative about the United States, and then they're getting rounded up and they don't know where they are. And that is absolutely bizarre and obscene.
I don't think it's so bizarre and obscene because
it is for this country, because things like that do not historically happen. And that's not due process. That's a violation of your constitutional rights, especially if you're an American citizen, or at least if you're a green card holder.
Mind you, they're just here on a visa. So they're just getting invited,
but they still have constitutional rights. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you are a fly, if you are obviously you have to be a human. You can't say you're just, but if you're anybody, if you fall out of an aircraft, if you're on the International Space Station, if you're a Syrian, if you're anything, if you're anything, a South African, you drop out of the sky and you land in the United States, you are afforded everything in the United States Constitution that you are not needed a citizenship for. That means you have constitutional rights. The first, all the amendments, everything applies to you basically. Because you're in the country, the Constitution applies to you. It's the supreme law of the land, and then it goes to state. Whatever state you're in, then it applies. And most states have things, especially around the border, that are going to say, okay, especially for Texas, what they can do to immigrants. But say you land in somewhere where it's like California, where there's you land in like a very liberal town, say, or very liberal city where it's like a sanctuary city where they allow for that. I won't so much talk about that because I don't know enough about that specific thing. I've heard a lot about sanctuary cities, how they're good, how they're bad. I can't make an informed opinion about. But just as well, it doesn't matter because when you are in the United States, the Constitution applies to you whether you are an alien from outer space, as long as you can prove that you are somehow human in some form, or whether you're just a human at all. If you were born on this earth, you can become an American. Just like you said, that means the Constitution applies to you just being in this country. So it's to overlook somebody's human rights and constitutional rights simply because they're not fully an American or not American enough for one standard is in itself kind of authoritarian as fuck. But mostly, it's just not a very human way of treating people.
Think about it this way. Think about it this way. So for anybody who is not listening, who is even questioning, I am not 100% American. I am a green card holder.
Right.
And in fact, I am not entitled to everything underneath the U.S. I am not protected by the Constitution of the United States.
You are protected by the Constitution of the United States.
No. I had to ask my attorney about this, and there was a whole conversation about it. And
there are certain things you need to be an American citizen for, like voting, or you need to be a certain age to do things. But most of the time, it goes down to a state level about what restrictions you have as not an American citizen. Like, I think you can't buy property unless you can have a certain visa, or if you're here for whatever else.
So I think what people forget about all the time is that even though I am legally protected, I am not seen by the U.S. government, whatever administration may be, as fully protected, because the green card that I have can be completely stripped away at any given moment.
But that's not in the Constitution. There's a green card is not in the Constitution.
So it's a very slippery slope, and and it's been told to me all the time, and that's not the first time that I am not entitled to all the protections of the United States. I'm still a guest in this. Well, not anymore. I'm not really a guest anymore. That's why I'm going to try to apply for citizenship this year, just to get it.
Very good idea. Very good idea.
Very good idea. So the whole idea is, at least from the from an immigrant standpoint, is that you are not protected. Let me say this: the U.S. is not obligated to protect you because you are not seen as American illegally.
To what extent, though? What protect? You mean if they get, say, for instance, a police officer is present, are they not going to protect? Oh, you're not an American citizen. I have an obligation to protect you.
No, meaning in the sense, let's say, so the idea is, and that's why I like this country. If the U.S. was any different, and it really was hardcore what it is, and let's say I commit a crime,
Sure.
and I have that is legally, the U.S. has every legal right to deport me back to the country that I came from because I am not American, and they see me as a threat, as a foreign body who is there to undermine the U.S. government or whatever it may be.
Yeah, depending on the crime. If you're making Molotov cocktails at rallies and stuff, sure. If you're spreading stuff online they don't like, no.
No, that's the thing. That's the thing that I am not, because I'm not seen as American. So let's say in this instance, I am not seen as American. I have no right to exercise the privileges that an American would have,
Okay.
However, places like California, New York, Texas, even places like Vermont or Rhode Island, whatever, they put in places these laws that make it more difficult for the U.S. government for the federal government to actually exercise these sort of, way of thinking. Now, if we were to take the same mentality and say someone goes to Canada, Canada is not going to agree that, just because you have a visa or just because, you haven't done anything right, that you are 100% Canadian and can be like a Canadian.
Right.
I know they're not, they're going to say, you have to go through the whole process of getting, turning into a Canadian for you to claim that you have these rights as a Canadian. So kind of going back to the visa thing, I have the understanding the visas really are only seen as an invitation to this country. And if you can prove that you are not going to cause any harm or any issue, then by all means stay. We want you, grow the American culture. but be known that you're just here on an invitation. And so it kind of goes back to a little experiment that we had in class.
Well, firstly, I want
One
to
of
say some what you said was very profound to me. That to grow the American culture, there are certain people in this country that don't believe that any immigrant or any person who's not a natural born American can grow the American culture.
Yeah, then those people unfortunately are so uneducated, and it's so sad that what saddens me about that is that the news often just tends to focus on those things, onto those like headlines, because they just, it creates views for them. People are tuning in
I mean,
to
I could
watch.
more personally say I know plenty of people more than what I've seen in the news of people that have these opinions. Or rather,
Yeah,
I could even conclude that this current administration probably has similar prospects of, white America.
yeah. So no, yeah. So to your point, I know for a fact that I am not 100% protected underneath the U.S. If I would say so, let's say I travel, I don't know, to a very dangerous country, right?
Sure.
Um, even though I am a green card holder, the U.S. does not have any obligation to come and save me, quote unquote. Meaning, I go to an embassy, or I go to, or the military comes and find me, whatever it may be. It has no obligation to, because it doesn't see me as 100% American. Versus someone who is either naturalized, either born here, either married here, and is a full U.S. citizen. The U.S. does have an obligation, to save that person. So
Yeah, I do find that interesting. I wonder if there's any examples of green card holders still getting like military assistance outside of the country. That would be interesting to research.
it's very difficult, yeah, and unfortunately, and the thing is that you know. I think to anybody listening who does have a visa, that's what I've just been told, that, or if you're a green card, just behave, and until you're 100% American, just do whatever you want, because you'll never be taken away. But
Yeah, but what
even
does
if,
behave mean outside? Like, don't break the law. Sure, that's fine.
yeah, don't
Don't
bring.
exercise your rights if it's critical to the United States administrations. Like that's not a true usage of your rights. That means that as a non-American, as a not or sorry, as a green card holder, that means you're not afforded all the rights in the United States Constitution like you should be.
Yeah, and I think people tend to forget about that, because you know yeah, so the it kind of goes back to the US being very forgiving and very welcoming, because there are people who are not even American. They criticize the country, and the US has every right to get rid of them and send them back to the country, but yet
I mean, there's
yet
certain powers the president has. It's called expatriation. That means that if he sees fit, he can actually strip somebody's United States citizenship, and that's because of an issue of national security, whatever. But the thing is, we don't have a lot of precedent for things like that in our country. So that's why he has to take things from like the 1700s, the 18th century, where that was like a true wartime for the creation of this country, where a lot of things were different, and we have, that has to rear itself from history just so we can say like, oh yeah, we have precedent for this in our country's history, so I can do this as president. That's almost seen as like an abuse of power in a certain way. But to just strip somebody's citizenship is like, yeah, at this point, it's a more subversive way of doing it. Like, yeah, you can just straight up say you're expatriated, go through the legal process, and you have to, go to a different country, whatever. Or you can go through the process of saying, okay, well, this is a green card holder. They're not fully American. We can't, we'll just not guarantee them all their rights. And when they try to express certain rights, we'll just say it's an issue of national security. That's called using, basically, it's a fallacy. It's creating a problem and saying, oh, well, you did the wrong thing. Now we can deport you. It's like giving somebody a baseball bat, putting them out in like a baseball game, and if they're not the person like up at bat being like, oh, they got the bat, that's the problem, because this game's not going on because they have the bat. It's like, you set up the situation. Like, how you set the rules. You can't then say somebody broke the rules when you changed them on them. Like, it doesn't work like that. Throwing the rug out from underneath people that have been green card holders, that have been in this country for decades, creating an issue and saying it's an issue of national security because somebody criticizes the president's want of or desire to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Yeah, we are in a very interesting time in American history, and there's a lot of precedent in other countries' histories for what this looks like. And if I could be frank, it looks like an authoritarian dictatorship. That's what this is akin to. things like this, they just do not happen in other countries without eventually leading to something like this. There's Republicans in Congress that are trying to make it so Trump can run for a third term, but only Trump, because there's 3 other living presidents right now, or sorry, 4, or 3 that had 2 terms. No, only 2, Biden only had 1 term. Jimmy Carter passed away earlier this year, but regardless, that could, they're going to change the law only for Trump. That's consolidation of power. That's a dictatorship.
Well, and so that's why I really have so much respect for the founding fathers, because really, if you kind of boil it down, the founding fathers of this country really were geniuses, because they had to study philosophy from various different countries. They were born in England, and in 18th century England, United Kingdom. So they knew that they could never leave the U.S. with a single ruler, because they know that eventually, the country is going to go into civil war or get destroyed or whatever it be. So that's why I so thank them. They're like so brave to say, you know what? No, we're going to have a 3-branch of government, so they can all check each other out. So not one branch is more powerful than the next, even though one administration might scream all the time, or it might seem that the Supreme Court is making decisions all the time, or even Congress. No, everybody has to balance each other out. So and that's very unique.
It was definitely a forward way of thinking for their time. Having this idea of a democratic republic it wasn't like a new idea, but it was certainly not expressed in the same way it was in America at the time. I don't think democracy, it first came from the Greeks, and I can't say specific, maybe 300 BC, maybe earlier than that.
Yeah.
And then republic form of government is more of the Romans, but then that eventually led to a dictatorship, and then the Papal States, which is the church, basically. So religion influenced it's not like a throne, but they were emperor, so I guess you could say. And then eventually it caused degradation of the entire empire. So that's kind of the problem, is that once we get to that point, and to me, I'm not so worried, because nothing crazy's happened yet. Some crazy things have happened, and it's eventually going to lead to something more crazy, I'm sure, but there's nothing like public execution of political opponents, or rounding up of like people that are in office, incumbents that are, not breaking the law, but they're just like, they've created a new law, pulled the rug out from underneath them, forced them to break the law, classify them as something terrible, and then like got rid of them. We haven't done, like, January 6th was the closest that we got. January 6th, 2021, when Donald Trump incited an insurrection against our Capitol, and his supporters tried to break in and kill our representatives. That was a big deal. If they actually had done that, that would have probably been a lot closer to like an actual dictatorship, because Donald Trump was still president. He could have just said, hey, I won. And then, we could have been still looking at a Donald Trump presidency now. But with the founding fathers, they still had plenty of flaws.
Of course, no.
You have to give it up to George Washington, because they wanted him to be king. Most citizens, after the Revolutionary War was won, wanted him to be king or be president for the rest of his life. He did it for 2 terms, 8 years. And he set the precedent until, I think the first president to want to run for 3 terms was...
Roosevelt. Wasn't it Roosevelt who did 3 terms?
No, nobody had... No. Well, FDR had 4, more like 3.5. Less than that, actually. But I think the first was actually Grant. I think he was the first to want to run for 3 terms. But then Theodore Roosevelt was also going to, but his party didn't want him to. That's why he started the Bull Moose Party, but that was the late 1800s. Early 1900s. Probably early 1900s at that time. But there's been a couple other presidents that have wanted to run for a 3rd term before it was constitutionally amended after FDR. But Truman was actually the last president that could have ran for a 3rd term, because he was grandfathered in the Constitution. But that's the thing. It's like, they were very forward thinking. They were also slaveholders. They all, most of them, all 50. There was 56 men that signed that signed the Declaration of Independence. Most of them were slave owners. So it's like,
Well, I mean, I'm not saying, I would ever own a slave, but if Europe, no, I'm not even gonna go there. It's and I don't think that, kind of going to the founding fathers, that I've heard that whole argument that that they were slave owners and then that we should disregard them as unimportant. I think that's
I didn't
very
make that argument. No, I
no, no,
didn't say
not
that
you.
at
No, no,
all.
no, no. I've heard other people. I've heard other people say that.
All
It's
right.
just because they were slave owners, and I'm like, well, that's a very dangerous way of thinking because you really cannot think of history of certain, of certain slivers and be selective of what history you represent. You have to see history as a whole.
Like
Sure,
applying
the
modern
whole
day standards to history.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
see, and that's the thing. The world was extremely different back then, even 200 years or 100 years from today,
Yeah.
in 1925, than it was. Than from our standards. So when I took because I took two courses in world history and U.S. history. I understand how Europe, in many ways, and I'm talking about 18th and 17th centuries and the whole slave trade and the whole world that Europe was living in. Europe, before any of this, before discovering the riches of the world, was a pretty terrible place to live. Most people were poor. They were just enclosed in a landmass, and when all the riches from the world started to being imported into Europe, of course people went crazy. Anybody would go crazy, to see the next big thing. And so I understand, as hard as it is, this whole slave trade thing. It's understandable, even though as monstrous as it was, and said and done, so many people even back then advocated for let's go ahead and abolish slave trade, just as just as an example, just a slave trade. But unfortunately, there was a very huge economical
Well,
interest.
yeah, people put aside their humanities to make more money, and that's what people still do today, but we just have more precedent for laws in place. One of them is not owning people. That's historically happened throughout the human condition for all of our understanding of the human condition is that people are
Yeah,
greedy and that they will always put their common man beneath their idea of how much money they can hopefully make.
yeah,
I mean,
and
that's that's like the worst as it gets because slavery is like one of the worst punishments I can think, and slavery went on in this country before it was a country basically for 400 years.
yeah,
Transatlantic slave trade stopped in like the 1800s, but the damage was done.
yeah,
It was too late. We at that point, I don't even think we were with the end of the transatlantic slave trade. Eventually, when that ended, there were so many slaves in the United States. We still have the largest population of black people outside of Africa. Actually, we have the largest population of black people outside of any place in the world. That's not Africa. Still,
yeah,
and that's and I'm not that's not to say that most people from the United that are in the United States that are black have descendants of slaves. That could be the case, for some people, but it's not the case for, I would say, even most people. 13% of the United States population is African American or black. And I
mhm,
think like of that 1.3%, or sorry, 1.3% is mixed race, so that could be black or anything else. But like I said, that doesn't mean that people, but that just does mean that eventually we got to a point where that was just economically inviolable, so it didn't even matter. So that's when we decided that, oh, okay, the transatlantic slave trade doesn't matter anymore. For the people that want to get rid of it, it's a win. For the people that were relying on it, they don't really exist anymore because they've changed the
yeah,
game. And that's the thing. It's all about power dynamics. Everything is always perpetually about power dynamics because we live on Earth and everything that's happened has been perpetuated by the human species. Everything we do is just made up shit. It's all made up. And that's what pisses me off sometimes is that people get bogged down with like, oh, well, I think they're doing the right thing and I guess we got to praise them in this regard but not this regard because, it could be so much worse. That's bullshit. And I'll tell you why. It's because we make it up as we go along. We could just make up better stuff. We can just do more humane things, and nothing is stopping us except for the present power dynamic structure. That is it. That is the only thing preventing anything from getting better is our concession to the power struggle to say that yes, we are so helpless or maybe things could be worse, so we should just kind of exist in the world that is. We need to be the change we want to see in the world. If I think that something is inhumane, I will do something about it. I will not say it could be worse.
yeah,
That is
yeah,
where I
yeah,
stand.
yeah. No, no, you're completely correct. You're completely correct, and so that's why I want to keep living in this country. And that's
Yeah.
and it's so. kind of just to go back a little bit about the whole that I'm not entitled to the whole protection of the U.S. That um, I know for a fact that even my attorney told me she's not practicing anymore. She's like retired, but she practiced for so many years. She told me you can never ever run for president if you were not born in the United States.
Well, that's one of the stipulations in the United States Constitution. Like, you have to be 35, you have to live in the United States for 14 years, and you have to be an American citizen. That means
No. So the thing is that you have to be born in the United States 100%,
I don't think you
because
have to be born in the United
because
States. You don't. No, you
you
definitely
have
don't
to.
have to, because Ted Cruz ran for president. He was born in Canada, but his parents were American. He was born an American citizen, just outside of the United States. You have to be born an American citizen.
And see, that's a unique thing about the U.S. that if your parents are American citizen, you're already you're automatically.
My same friend Jibril, shout out once again, Jib bro, my boy. He was born an American citizen. He was actually born a tri-citizen. He was Jordanian, Emirati, and United States citizen.
Yeah, which is really cool. Actually, people have to triple.
Yeah, but in the United States you can only be two. So I think he's only. Actually, I don't even know.
Oh no, in the United States you can have as many as you possibly want. However, some countries like Japan, I know for a fact, only tell you either are 100% Japanese citizen or you're not whatsoever. And I know a lot of people who were born in Japanese only contain a green card because Japan does not allow them to become American. So they have to choose either to be citizens of Japan or be citizens of the U.S. If they do become citizens of the U.S., I think they have to renounce Japanese citizen 100%. So they can't keep both.
I know some countries you can have many. You can be quasi citizen. I know that some you can only have like one or two.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so, going back to me, I can never be president if I ever wanted.
No, because you weren't born an American citizen.
Yeah, I can run for Congress. I can run for the House. I can run for governor. I can do all of that. But even if I am 100% American, as I am now, there's this philosophy. I think it was the Greeks who made this philosophy, or the Romans, who said that I still have some sort of interest in the country that I was born in. So in this case, I still have rights in Mexico. For myself. So, and I may have an internal bias, to defend the Mexican government, as an example. And so my brother, on the other hand, he was born in America, in the U.S. here in California. So he could become president if he wants to. So, I think what is become now is that this is just speaking for someone who comes from Mexico, from Latin America, is that we realized that our governments were just not doing what we asked them to, and so many people.
That's the tale as true as all tales, is that the government does not do what the people want.
Exactly, and so we saw the prosperity that America was trying to practice, even though it wasn't 100%, and so we made the journey. Now, what's so funny and what's so ironic about that is countries, and I'm just speaking for Mexico. Countries like Mexico, they're pissed off, that their citizens are going across the border. It's kind of, well, Mexico as the government, open your eyes. Your people are
better, and people won't, I guess.
Exactly, make it better, and people won't leave. And sure, Mexico has come really far, but it still has a very, very long way to go. So when I hear the Mexican government complain about how the American government is a bully or whatever it wants to call it, sure, of course, sometimes the American government can be a bully. But, let's kind of expand and start wondering why your citizens are leaving the country, and going to like the United States or Canada or somewhere in the UK, which is, by the way, the most weirdest thing to see a Mexican restaurant in the UK.
The food's actually good, though.
It is the most strangest thing. So, so it's, so this whole ICE raid thing is that, I think people they grew too comfortable in a country that's not even theirs. And in fact, one of the questions that we had on the experiment of the class that I told you about, and this was actually for a U.S. government class, The one of the questions that the teacher asked, or it was on the piece of paper, was like, if you were to invite this person to your home, does this person, are you obligated to protect this person if they would to be arrested? Like, are you obligated? Is your guest obligated? Are you obligated to go and bail your guest out? And most people said no, because they're just a guest. And kind of a similar question was like, does this person who's just a guest in your house entitled to the opinions of how you, I don't know, spend your money, for example? Do they have the privilege to go into your bank account and take the money that you have in the bank? And the answer was always no. It's like, so it kind
Yeah, when you're able to phrase questions like that, you're curating answers for sure. You're not gonna. That's like saying, "Would you care if somebody walked in your room and punched you in the face?" You'd probably be like, "Well, yes, obviously." So yeah, everybody's gonna respond in a very similar way. But say for instance, if you knew somebody and they had to contest your allegory here, if I were to say somebody in this situation, I invited them to my house, they're a guest, but they're a good friend of mine. I fed them, I gave them dinner because that's how you treat guests. That's one of the things you do as
of,
a host is you're nice to the
yeah,
people. Otherwise, you are better off not inviting people at all. If you're not a good
yeah.
host, don't invite people at all, right?
So
So
exactly.
if you're in this example, if you're going to do something terrible to these people and not guarantee them the rights that they should have, say we'll feed you dinner, wash the dishes, we can watch some TV. Instead, you switch up on them, you do something terrible, and yeah, hey, these people came into my house. Now I'm going to charge them for how much money, or how much money the food was. Well, wait a second. There was an assumption when they came in that something was going to happen. They weren't going to be held accountable, or they didn't have to pay you for the food that you provided. Right? There were certain things that they thought were just part of the gig. And a
Yeah.
lot of times when you go to other places, that's the case. It's part of the gig. But for our case, for this situation, something happens and we say, you know what? Actually, I don't want them here anymore. We're going to make something up, change the rules, and they're going to get arrested, deported, or we're going to kick them out. And that's kind of
Yeah.
what it's gotten to it's evolved or devolved now into the state of being of what it is today. There's ICE roundups. There's, the dismantling of human rights, or the disbanding, not dismantling, the disbanding of human rights. It's the oversight of a gigantic authoritative figure that just wants, results. It's the ends fits the means, and that's the most dangerous mentality for any type of leader, especially what we can consider to be one of the most powerful political leaders on the planet, the United States president. So
No, yeah.
that's kind of my conclusion of all of this is basically that human rights are being disbanded. They're definitely being overlooked. People are getting their rights taken away simply because they're not American enough. Our idea of what America should be has precedent, and that is that, if you want to come here to better your life, you should be able to do that. We should be more welcoming and not send them out to torture chambers in Guantanamo Bay. That's kind of my penultimate frustration, I suppose.
No, of course, and then the mentality, at least from the majority of the Mexican, Hispanic, Latino community. And by the way, whoever's listening, I'm speaking about those like myself who came to this country now that
I
are
do want
not
to say
born.
really quick though, there are a lot of other immigrants here that are not strictly Latino or Hispanic. There are some people that are from any other part of the world. They could be European, they could be African, they could be from any part of the African continent, any part of Europe, any part of Asia, or wherever. And a lot of people are not strictly from Mexico if they're illegal immigrants. That's also a stigma that's kind of built that I'll be part of the tearing down of, I suppose.
Yeah. So what I was gonna say is that and I think people forget that, and I don't think people really realize that Mexican Americans do follow a very different mentality than Mexican born Mexicans.
Yeah.
That is the exact same thing for Venezuelan Americans, for Salvadorian Americans, for Cuban Americans. If so I carry a very different mentality than a Mexican American.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, what at least there is a very good understanding within the with Latinos and Hispanics is, in many ways, they're happy that the ICE raids are happening, even though you're going to probably see on the news, that people don't like it. Subconsciously, they are happy because again, it goes back to the point that you're so like we are trying to become American and show the country that we belong, and then you're here creating mess for everyone, and dismantling what hundreds of years that we've been trying to contribute to the US. And so in many ways a lot of them are happy. A lot of Hispanics, a lot of Latinos are happy that the ICE raids are happening, because finally you're removing a thorn from your side that was just there for the very longest time. And so it's cruel because their rights are taken away, and and a lot of a lot of Latinos understand that, but at the same time, the outlook of life is different.
Until it happens to them, though. I don't want to cut you off, but until it happens to them, they'll be happy. They might even be subconsciously happy. They may be overtly happy, but until it happens to them, they're gonna have a completely different opinion. When they're in a jail cell because they're like, well, I thought I was one of the good ones. Their entire mentality is going to collapse in on itself. They're not going to have any legs to stand.
No, of course, and that's why we dig the mentality. That's why we dig the ideas into the children's head. Behave, or else there are going to be real life consequences, and unfortunately, it does happen. So, I want to say again, for any Latino or any Hispanic listening, you are not going to get deported randomly. There has to be a very good reason as to why ICE is in your neighborhood or is in your place of work. There has to be a legitimate reason. Now, if you do get deported, if you do get detained by ICE, mind you that there is going to be a whole legal process. You're not just gonna get detained by ICE and get sent immediately back to your country. It does not work that way.
Make those guarantees, Manuel. I don't know if you can say that. It sounds good, and that's what we hope. But from the examples that have taken place so far, I can't say you can guarantee that.
I'm not guaranteeing, but that is the common practice, that you will have to be presented in front of the judge, and if the judge says that you're out of the country, that is the final. That's the whole final ruling, unfortunately. So, I think for anybody listening, you don't even have to be Latino or Hispanic. You do have a green card. You're going to be safe. You're going to be safe. If you haven't done something that can, make you a target point, just live on your life and try to become a citizen, as soon as you possibly can.
I can agree with that. Try to become a citizen as fast as possible. That's me.
Because
once you're before kind of sound like shape up or ship out, which is okay, yeah, maybe, but more so try to get to a path try to get to the citizenship path. Try to become a United States citizen. Be legalized in this country, so that you actually have apparently the extra real rights that us Americans that were born here have, that is apparently not afforded to everybody just because you weren't born here. So.
No, exactly. And, there has to be a fix on the whole immigration system. There has to be. There has to be, because it's just, it's gotten out of control, unfortunately, and...
I have some ideas, but, they're too practical. They make too much sense. Perhaps another time we can get into that, because I remember you told me you were like, I don't want to do this huge long podcast, maybe 20 minutes. It's an hour and a half, man. Well, it's an hour and 28 minutes, 29 minutes. Boom, 29 minutes.
Good. Good.
But you know what? It was a great conversation. I was very happy to have you on again. We haven't talked in a while.
Yeah.
We actually haven't really talked since the last time I had you on, honestly, which was a long time ago, it feels like.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you live in California, so it's not the easiest to be able to always connect. But just as why I do appreciate you coming back on and sharing your experiences and some of your opinions. It's interesting, and like I said, I mean, I haven't said this, so I can't say like I said, but I hope nothing happens to you, my friend. I'm happy to know that you're trying as well to get into the path of citizenship. You've been here for what you said is 20 years. Or 25, 24 years, 25 years.
Yeah, 24 years at this point, yeah.
Yeah, that would be a travesty, because this is basically, like you've said in the other podcasts, kind of all you know about. Not really, but, also kind of. But
it's this year. No, this year I'm going to really start speaking to attorneys now.
Do it now. I might even put a citizenship test or something in the description if people actually want to watch this video if they're looking for information, and they can actually get on their own path for citizenship. Because like I said, this is something, well, maybe not like I've said, maybe I haven't said this before. My mentality is this: I believe more people should be participating in the economy. That allows for a growing in the economy and a raising, a raising of the middle and lower classes. If more people can participate, that means more people can contribute to the economy. That means prices can become more sustainable. They can be cheaper, or they can increase at a slower rate. It just allows for people to have a better standard of living if more people get to participate. So I think it's a good thing to have labor for other countries come into the country. Legally is preferred. Illegally, look, if you have a problem with illegal workers, don't hire them. That's kind of my thing.
Yeah.
But overall, there's people in here that I think are good people. They just need a path to citizenship. So maybe I will put that in the description. But otherwise, Manuel, anything to leave us with today? Anything you want to say to be your lasting impression with everybody?
I don't know. Come to California if you're not in California. Despite what you've heard of San Francisco, it's a great city to visit. It's what that's a whole other
Despite
episode.
what you've heard.
Despite what you heard, you could have a great time if you come to California, or go to New York where John is. New York is also
Binghamton, New York. We actually have some ice raids in here as well. So if you're thinking this is not going to happen here, it does. So. But,
when I say New York, I mean the city. But okay.
Oh yeah, everybody means New York State. I live in the state. My unfortunate ass lives in New York State. But anyway, thank you very much, my friend, and thank you everybody else for watching today. Oh, I didn't do the Socks with John intermission. That's okay. We'll do it right now. Socks with John. Of course, every episode is brought to you by Socks with John. We haven't done a podcast in a little bit, so my mistake that I kind of forgot about this. We won't have this go on for too much longer, but. As always, Socks with John has been sponsoring every single thing that's gone on this channel. I think it's the most popular thing I think I've posted so far, really. But I appreciate it. It was my niece's birthday yesterday. I got to do a video with her, so everybody.
Oh, yes.
Her very first. It was a fairy birthday. It was her first birthday, so it was a great time. But as always, thank you for checking out Socks with John. I was supposed to meet some people today. I didn't have a chance actually to. So on Wednesday, I'll meet the people that I have to as well, but it's just a shout out to the people. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. That's all for me today. Thank you, Manuel, once again for joining us, and I will see you guys in the next one. Adios, mis muchachos, and peace out.